Good morning and welcome to Mission Control Houston and Space Station Live. The Expedition 38 crew is squeezing in a lot of work and science today before taking a break tomorrow to celebrate Thanksgiving. Watching over the systems here on the ground today is Flight Director Mike Lammers with astronaut Scott Tingle in the Capcom role. And on board the space station, we have Russian Commander Oleg Kotov, U.S. flight engineers Mike Hopkins and Rick Mastracchio, Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency flight engineer Koichi Wakata, and Russian flight engineers Sergei Rosansky and Mikhail Turin. Mike Hopkins, Kotov, and Rosansky launched aboard their Soyuz TMA-10M from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan at 3:58 p.m. Central Time on September 25th and docked just a few hours later. They've now spent 63 days in space, and they were joined earlier this month by Mastracchio, Wakata, and Turin, who launched in their own Soyuz at 10:14 p.m. Central on November 6th and docked early November 7th. Those three are working on their 21st day in space. Together, the crew and station are orbiting 257 miles above Myanmar and heading towards the Chinese border. They're more than halfway through their day now, having started at 2 a.m. Central Time. The work today primarily revolves around scientific experiments, and there are a number that the crew are working on. Mike Hopkins has spent some of this morning installing and performing a checkout on the NanoRack BioRack and also performing a run of the SLAMMD experiment. That's SLAMMD, and it stands for the Space Linear Acceleration Mass Measurement Device. Using Newton's second law of motion, it allows us to get weight measurements, or to be more correct, a mass measurement of astronauts when they're floating weightless in space. Hopkins and Koichi Wakata will both participate in the reaction self-test before they go to bed tonight. That's aimed at trying out a way for astronauts to objectively assess whether fatigue might affect their performance in space. Wakata also spent some time talking with 6 through 12-year-olds from Poland via the space station's ham radio. The crew on board the space station is often able to talk with students that way through opportunities arranged by the Amateur Radio on the International Space Station program, or ARISS. You can find out more about that program at ARISS.org. Over the course of the day, Wakata is also scheduled to spend some time on the Cosmo experiment, which uses advanced cameras to record celestial events with unprecedentedly clear images, and also the Biological Rhythms experiment, which looks at the long-term effects of microgravity exposure on cardiac autonomic function by analyzing 48-hour electrocardiograms. And meanwhile, Rick Mastracchio is scheduled to spend some time working on the BioLab and also with the BCAT experiment, or the binary colloidal alloy test. That study looks at the effects of microgravity on colloidal suspensions. And finally, Commander Oleg Kotov has a light duty period this afternoon to allow him to spend time during the rest of the crew's pre-sleep period today, monitoring the Progress 53 flyby scheduled to occur at 3:53 p.m. Central Time. The Progress launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan at 2:53 p.m. Central on Monday, carrying 2.9 tons of food, fuel, and supplies for the station crew. But before it docks to the station, it will be approaching the station for a checkout of its upgraded Kurs automated rendezvous equipment. It's going to be flying within a mile of the complex, providing Russian flight controllers with valuable data on the revamped Kurs system, and then that system will eventually be integrated into advanced Progress and piloted Soyuz vehicles in the future. Once it passes the station on its flyby, the Progress will be commanded to move above and behind the station over the next 48 hours, setting it up for a final rendezvous and docking to the aft port of the Zvezda service module on Friday at 4:28 p.m. Central Time. That's what's been going on in space today, and this is Mission Control Houston. Another activity that Koichi Wakata is working on today is the sprint activity, which is subtitled the Integrated Resistance and Aerobic Training Study. It evaluates the use of high-intensity, low-volume exercise training to minimize the loss of muscle, bone, and cardiovascular function in space station crew members during long missions. 3 days a week of resistance training using the space station's weightlifting equipment, the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, at a higher intensity than normal, better protects against the loss of skeletal muscle mass and function for astronauts. It also protects bone health compared to resistance exercise on ARED 6 days a week at a lower intensity and higher volume. So this study alternates days of high-intensity interval training with days of continuous aerobic exercise, which they believe will be more effective than the continuous aerobic exercise for the maintenance of cardiovascular function. Upon completion of the sprint study, investigators expect to be able to provide an integrated resistance and aerobic exercise training protocol that will help maintain muscle, bone, and cardiovascular health in astronauts while reducing their total exercise time that's necessary over 180 days of spaceflight. That's going to provide valuable information to support investigators' long-term goal of protecting human fitness for even longer space exploration missions. And of course, we've also found that these sorts of studies on board the space station are also often applicable here on Earth to people who are confined to beds for a long period of time and as such experience similar bone loss to what we see in astronauts. See a view live here looking through the Destiny laboratory into, or excuse me, through the Destiny laboratory into the Unity node, where a couple of the crew members are taking some time out to grab lunch at this time. As I mentioned, they're actually more than halfway through their day, having started it at 2 a.m. Central Time, and it is actually time for their midday meal at this point. Next up here on NASA TV, we're going to take some time out to head out to the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, where Lori Meggs is standing by live to tell us about an upcoming anniversary for a highly successful program that led the way for science on the space station. Lori?
It was called Space Lab, and tomorrow marks 30 years since it launched. Space Lab was a module inside the Space Shuttle's payload bay where numerous science experiments were carried out, and it really did pave the way for the way we do science on Space Station today. We're privileged to have with us the Marshall Space Flight Center's Deputy Director, Teresa Van Hooser, who, among other things that she's done here at this center, you led some of those Space Lab missions. Take us back to those days. What was Space Lab like?
Wow, so Space Lab was a great team effort for a lot of us. It was where all the centers were able to come together to accomplish a single mission, and also the international partners. So Space Lab was one of those things that that you could see from beginning to end, from the inception of the mission to all the way through the operations and through the scientists actually getting their science.
And it really was fast-paced. You know, we've got 6 months now, but back then it was all packed into maybe a couple of weeks, right?
Right. We had anywhere from 10 days to about 2 weeks, 16 days, and we had every minute planned out for the whole mission. And so we took advantage of every minute for the crew time that we had to actually conduct the science. And we actually worked shift work at that time, so the crews had their red shift and blue shifts just so that we can make sure that we were able to accomplish everything we need to accomplish during the mission.
How were the missions carried out here? I know we're standing next to the room where it all happened. How do we do business then, and how has technology progressed today?
Well, see, during the Space Lab days, we actually had all the scientists come here during the mission, and so we had a room for them where they actually could could interact with our teams, and and could collect their science data. And so today, technology has gotten us to a place where they can actually be at their home facilities, and we can ship their science to them. They can even talk to the crew from their facilities, and so it's really come a long way. And so we were able to actually make that transition towards the end of Space Lab, and so we had a good practice ground for it.
And you bring up a good point. It really was our first opportunity to work with international partners. What was that like?
Oh, it was great. Sometimes I would go during the mission, I would go down to the science operations area, and each of the teams had their own, they were working together and were talking their own language there, and then of course they all spoke very good English, so when they interacted with us, it was, they spoke English, but to go and just kind of hear their teams talking and then talking about the science they were able to get, it was pretty phenomenal. So for me, it was a great experience to get to work with all the different international teams.
A lot of science accomplished, and it kind of takes us through the progression now. We've gone Skylab, Space Lab, now Space Station, but everything we've learned is going to take us into the future, right?
It has, both from the development of the payloads that we fly on orbit. We learned a lot during Space Lab, and what we do and what we don't do, how we do the design, and are able to help the scientists as they start building their hardware now for the International Space Station. We can make sure that it's actually going to work well on orbit, and the things that they need to do so that it's a lot more crew accessible. So if they do have a problem, then the crew can actually help them out and do some refurbishment on orbit and help them fix it. We also have learned a lot about working with the crew. What kind of training do they need? Can we wait and actually give it to them by video on orbit? Because they, especially with the 6 months, it was easy when it was just the 14 days to train them on that short amount of time. But when you're talking about payloads that go up early or that come up later after they've already been through their training, we had to really be creative in how we then trained them to be able to do what we wanted to do.
And I want to go back to, you said you worked 12-hour shifts, and I know for you, life went on at home too. Tell us a little bit about what was going on at home while you were managing these missions.
Yeah, so my girls were 4 and 2 for the first Space Lab mission that I was a part of, and I had the night shift. And so I worked the 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And so my oldest daughter actually got the chicken pox during that time. And so my husband would take care of her at night, of course, but during the daytime I'd come home and we'd just curl up in the bed together. And of course the good thing was that she was content with that because she didn't feel good anyway, and I actually was able to get some sleep before I had to go back on console. So life does go on, and that's part of the 24/7 operations, and doing that 365 days a year. Our operations team here has to be very adaptable, and they have it takes a great team to pull that off. And so if somebody has some kind of family things that they've got going on, they're able to pull on their cohorts to help them out.
I'm trying to get that Paycom job in there to talk to the astronauts. But
That's probably the coolest job that everybody wants.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Very exciting. And let's take a live look into the Payload Operations Integration Center. Busy at work today. The team is led by Jay Nichols, who's the pod, and they're working BCAT setup, which is a fluid physics experiment, and several human research experiments, VO2 max, which measures aerobic capacity, and also SPRINT, which evaluates high-intensity, low-volume exercise to minimize bone loss and cardiovascular health. So a busy day for the crew, a lot of exercising going on. That'll do it for us from the Payload Operations Integration Center in Huntsville. Now back to you at Mission Control in Houston.
Thanks so much, Lori, and congratulations and happy anniversary to everybody who worked on the Space Lab project.
And also the gas calibration hose. Those are portable PFS gas hose Bravo and Alpha. One side is detached from the calibration and breathing gas tanks, but the other side is still attached to the portable PFS. I just wanted to make sure that this is the right configuration for stowage.
And Koichi, thanks for all your information. That is all good.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you very much for checking.
And thanks again.
Flight Engineer Koichi Wakata there talking with the Paycom that we just heard mentioned at the Marshall Space Flight Center about the storage of the SPRINT experiment that he's been working on. Besides this work that Wakata is wrapping up with the SPRINT experiment, he's also scheduled to take some time today and spend it on the anisotubule experiment, which is an investigation that looks to understand the mechanisms that plants use in growing stems of the right thickness to support them against gravity. Seeing here some video from recorded earlier today of Rick Mastracchio working with the BioLab experiment laboratory. That's one of the many experiment facilities that the International Space Station makes good use of. This particular one's in Columbus, and it's a multi-user research facility that is used to perform space biology experiments on microorganisms, cells, tissues, small plants, and even small invertebrates. The facility allows scientists to gain a better understanding of the effects of microgravity and space radiation on those biological organisms.
Station Tsukuba on 2 for Koichi, 4K camera, if available.
Today, Mastracchio is actually scheduled to be performing a commissioning run of the BioLab facility, taking out some space holder equipment and putting in the correct equipment to actually begin using the facility. That will be setting it up for a series of future uses. The facility itself is actually divided into two sections, which is the automated section and the manual section. Manual section is designed for crew interaction with the experiments. The automated section can operate autonomously or telerobotically via commands sent from the ground, and it uses a large incubator, 2 centrifuges, a microscope, a spectrophotometer, which measures the spectrum of light absorbed by a sample, and a sample handling mechanism, as well as an automatic temperature-controlled storage unit to keep a small amount of sample at the correct temperature. The manual section that the crew interacts with consists of an experiment preparation unit, a BioGlove box, and an additional temperature control unit for storing experiment containers.
Yes, you can. Although note at the end of the calibration syringe tube there, the mouthpiece interface looks like it came off, so you want to reconnect that. And Koichi, on that mouthpiece interface, once you feel resistance, push it in, and you'll give it a quarter turn, and then you can cinch it up a little bit harder. It'll let you go just a little bit past that first stop.
Phoenix Space to Ground 2 again for BioLab question on the dummy mass. Is that the proper orientation?
Rick, that's the proper orientation you got right now.
And Huntsville Station on 2 for NanoRack.
Go ahead for NanoRack.
Yes, it's my curiosity though. I wanted to take a look at the connectors, make sure they all looked flush and everything. And second note as well, that switch that I showed you on the underside of the centrifuge, there is one on the back side as well. And it shows that it's in position 3.
Besides that work with the BioLab this morning, Rick Mastracchio is also scheduled to work with the BCAT experiment today, or the binary colloidal alloy test. This is the C1 iteration of the BCAT experiment, which is actually run by the Canadian Space Agency, and it studies nanoscale particles dispersed in liquids known as colloidal suspensions, which are commonly found in things like paint, electronic polishing compounds, and food products. Those suspensions have the unique property that the particle phases separate, like oil and water, and the particles self-assemble into crystals that interact strongly with light. Photographing these samples in microgravity lets scientists measure the processes of the separation and reforming into crystals while avoiding the effects of particles sinking due to gravity. On Earth, gravity causes the colloids to settle, which makes studying them difficult. But in the station's microgravity, scientists, with the help of astronauts, can study the growth of much larger crystal structures, which maximizes the amount that the behavior can be explored. Improved understanding of the processes could lead to more refined manufacturing processes and commercial products. Ideally, this study will help make colloidal engineering a reality as well. Plus, it should help scientists understand some of the fundamental properties of these mixtures. Seeing a live view here of the Pacific Ocean from an altitude of about 257 miles up. Space station's heading southeast now, a little ways off the coast of North America.
Listening station on 2 for Gale.
Go ahead, Hopper, get you loud and clear on 2.
Yeah, Mike, are you guys ready for a voice and comm check?
Stand by.
Flight engineers Rick Mastracchio and Mike Hopkins took time out of their schedule yesterday to stop and talk with kindergartners through 12th grade students at the Charles County Public School System outside of Washington, D.C. Students got to personally ask the astronaut questions, and we're going to replay that event for you next here on NASA TV.
Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
Station, we are ready.
Charles County Public Schools, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
Station, this is Monique Wilson with Charles County Public Schools. How do you hear me?
We read you loud and clear. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, actually morning. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Charles County Public Schools. Our students are excited to talk to you, so let's take our first question.
What interesting things are you guys discovering with your experiments on board the ISS in space?
Oh, there's a lot of interesting things going on here at any time. At any time up here, we're doing research on new medical vaccines, for example. We're doing material science research. We're developing new technologies to further space exploration so that we can go beyond low Earth orbit and go back to the moon and Mars or asteroids. There's always research going on. You can see behind us we got various types of human research going on. We are actually test subjects ourselves. Many of the testing and experiments that go on, actually, we are the subjects. So there's always interesting things going on up here, and we got lots of scientists on the ground supporting us around the clock, basically.
We have Morgan Thompson from Mitchell Elementary.
If you didn't become an astronaut, what would you be?
Hi, Morgan. That's a great question. And in fact, if I hadn't become an astronaut, I would have still been doing what I was doing when I did become an astronaut, and that's I was a colonel in the United States Air Force. In fact, I've only been an astronaut for the last 4 years, so most of my adult life I've spent in the Air Force testing airplanes and working in an area we call program management, so basically helping to purchase and develop new technologies for the Air Force. And so that kind of leads into the next point of I loved what I was doing in the Air Force, and so if any of you are out there interested in becoming astronauts, the most important thing is to find something you love and to do that and do it well, and if becoming an astronaut works out, that's just a bonus.
Candace Jackson, Diggs Elementary.
Why doesn't the sun make outer space bright?
Well, the sun emits electromagnetic radiation. It emits sunlight, if you will, all over all directions. But you need an object to actually reflect that sunlight to see it. So, for example, the Earth is bright in the daytime because it's reflecting the sun's light. And that sun is still traveling through space. It lights up the space station. If you look up in the sky after sunset sometimes, you can actually see the space station flying overhead. And that's because the sun is hitting the space station and lighting it up.
Victoria Gordon, Indian Head Elementary.
Are you scared when you are taking off in space?
Victoria. That's an interesting question. Rick, this is his fourth space flight, I think, and this was my first time up. And so, the nice thing was we have a lot of training to get ready for the space flight and for that launch. And once you crawl into the rocket for real, it just kind of becomes a little bit routine because that's how you've been practicing and that's how you've done simulations. And so you just start going through your procedures, and then the next thing you know, you're up in space. And so fortunately, you're busy enough, you've got enough things to do that you don't have a lot of time to think about being scared.
Nina Brown Wade Elementary.
What inspired you to be an astronaut and go up into the space station?
Hey, Nina, that's a great question. When I was about your age, I was always interested in science. Whenever my teachers would talk about space or about airplanes or rockets, I would get very excited and pay very close attention. And I also was very good at math. So math and science was just a natural thing for me. And when I went to high school, that continued. And I went on to college and became an engineer. And then eventually I started sending in applications to NASA. So I guess what inspired me the most was it's so exciting. Working for NASA is an incredible job. We do a lot of great things, not just as astronauts, but as engineers and scientists at NASA. And NASA is a great place to work, and it was a perfect fit for me just because of my love of math and science.
Leah DeFalco.
Have you ever done an experiment on the International Space Station where the results surprised you?
That's a great question, and Rick alluded to it earlier. We have what we call principal investigators on the ground that have designed a lot of the experiments that we do up here. One of the ones that I've worked with is it's called a capillary flow experiment, and that actually means we're looking at fluids, so a water, and what air or gases do in that fluid. And so they were trying to separate the gas from the liquid just by the shape of the vessel, and because the water acts a little bit differently up here in space. And so the results of that, just based on the shape of a vessel, were very interesting.
Jolie Lombardi, Higdon Elementary.
How does it feel to walk on Earth when you come back from no gravity?
Well, that's a good question. I've flown on the space shuttle 3 times, but I was only in space for 2 weeks. And so when I landed on board on the space shuttle, landed back at the Kennedy Space Center, I felt a little bit weak, but it wasn't too bad because I was only in space for 2 weeks. But the biggest concern that I had was my ears. It was kind of like after being on a roller coaster or a ride at an amusement park, your head's kind of spinning sometimes for a few minutes. Well, that's how I felt when I first landed on Earth. And that lasted only about an hour or two, and then that went away. Now, this mission, I'm going to be in orbit for 6 months, but we exercise every day for 2 hours. So hopefully when I land, I'll be strong enough to walk and just be just fine.
Nina Harris, J.C. Parks.
Could you keep a living organism like a fish in space?
Nina, great question, and the answer is yes. In fact, we've had in previous experiments, we've had fish on the space station, we've had spiders, we've had butterflies, and so there's definitely been living organisms up here. Right now, we don't have any animals or insects or fish or anything, but we do have, I've been doing a little bit of experimenting on my own, and so you can actually, if you can see that, that's a sunflower that I've been growing. And it's not doing too bad, but it's probably not growing quite as fast or as tall as it might be down on Earth.
Tamara McGee, Mary Matula.
Hello. As an astronaut, what are the problems you deal with and how do you solve them?
Can you repeat the question, please?
As an astronaut, what are the problems you deal with and how do you solve them?
Well, that's a good question. You know, we have a lot of problems up here, little problems, just like if you were working on your car, or you're doing your homework, or you have to clean your room. You know, anytime you do something, you run into little problems, like you can't find you want to do your homework, but you can't find a pencil. You know, so when we're up here, like today, I had to do something. I had to load up some new software on a device, and I couldn't find a card to slide in the thing. It took about 30 or 40 minutes. So basically, you know, we just got to remain patient, and we got a whole team of folks on the ground. We got thousands of folks on the ground, and they're very smart, and they know the answers to just about all our questions. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. So we have a big team of folks that help us out on a regular basis, and we seem to be able to solve just about any problem we run into.
Alicia Douglas, Eva Turner Elementary.
What if one of the astronauts gets sick? What will they do?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question again?
What if one of the astronauts gets sick? What will they do?
Can somebody help me out with that? I'm having a hard time understanding that one. I'm sorry.
She's asking, what do you do if an astronaut gets sick?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, we do what you we do what you do, and we call the doctor. Actually, we have a flight doctor that's tracking us. He kind of keeps watch over us, or they keep watch over us as we're on our 6-month mission. But if we do have problems up here, we're all trained. We have some initial training or some basic training on how to treat people, and so this is actually one of our emergency medical treatment packs. And so if it's serious enough, you know, we've got a lot of equipment up here, a lot of medicines that we can help take care of us. And then on this mission right now, there's 6 of us up here, and we're very fortunate that one of our crewmates on one of our cosmonaut Russian crewmates, he's actually a doctor as well. So we're in pretty good hands.
Elizabeth Parent, Summers Middle School.
Do you ever have to worry about static electricity while in space?
Yes, we do worry about static electricity. Excellent question. Even when we're inside the space station here, we have to wear a grounding strap if we have to deal with sensitive electronics. If you ever open up your computer or any kind of electronics, even there on Earth, usually you wear a grounding strap to protect the electronics so you don't zap things. Okay, you're in Maryland, so you have winter there. You know, sometimes in the winter when it's really cold and it dry out and you kind of rub your feet, your slippers, or your socks on the carpet, and you get a little zap on the doorknob. Same thing can happen up here, or even outside when we're doing spacewalks. We have to worry about all those things, and so we take precautions to protect ourselves and the equipment.
Annie Landgraf, Milton Summers Middle School.
What is the feeling you get when you enter the zero gravity after exiting the atmosphere at escape velocity?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So when I first entered space, got into the microgravity environment, it felt like, I want you to picture yourself sitting in your seat, except put it upside down on the ceiling. So you're all now sitting on the ceiling upside down, and that feeling of falling, that's what it felt like for me for probably the first 24 hours that I was in space. Certainly for the entire time once I got into space until we docked with the space station. And so it was a pretty uncomfortable feeling, but eventually your body gets used to it. You start to figure out that there's no real up or down, and it's quite enjoyable.
Misa Oliver, Mattawomen Middle School.
What kind of STEM work do you do to prepare for your explorations, and do you specialize in certain areas?
Well, of course, I am an engineer by training. I went to school to become an engineer. There's a lot of science and technology and math in that. As far as training as an astronaut, we have a long training period, which involves a lot of science because we're doing a lot of science experiments up here. Math is just a daily thing, and as an engineer or an astronaut, I mean, math is just in your life every day. We don't do anything specific to math in terms of training, but we use it on a regular basis. But our training is 2.5 years long. It's a lot of different technologies. It's a lot of different sciences, and engineering is involved. So it's an everyday thing for us.
Daryl Ragudin, Benjamin Stoddard Middle School.
What does it feel like to take off from Earth, and what does re-entry into our atmosphere feel like?
Yeah, that's another great question. So we launched on a Russian Soyuz rocket and spacecraft, and right now you guys are sitting down there in a 1G environment. So that's what Earth's gravity is pulling you down, and that's what you normally feel. During that launch, you actually see an increase in that gravity. So it feels like you feel like you're a little bit heavier as it's pushing down, and that's the same thing that'll happen when we're landing. Is we'll have an increase in what we call those G's. But it doesn't last real long. Now, the other interesting part about the launch is the rockets have what we call stages, and as one stage ends and the next stage starts, there's a pretty good kick where you're thrown forward in your seat, and then when the next stage starts up, you get thrown back again. And so those are pretty exciting. Now, as far as the landing, I don't really know yet because this is my first mission, so I haven't had a landing yet. But I'm certainly looking forward to it in about 4 more months.
Andrew Fan, Piccowaxon Middle School.
Are there any experiments currently going on that you can elaborate on?
Yeah, there's a lot of experiments going on. I'm just trying to think of the one of the ones that we could talk or that we can talk just in a short period of time. One of the some of the things we're doing is a lot of remote medical evaluations. For example, the doctors like to be able to evaluate us from the ground. So we are actually almost trained ultrasound technicians, and we actually give each other ultrasounds, abdomens and heart, and we even do an ultrasound on our eye, and the folks down on the ground can review all this data. The doctors take this data and see, not just to see if we're healthy, but they're evaluating how our body changes in space. So we're doing a lot of things like that right now, and we'll be doing that throughout the 6 months.
Tanita Bivens, La Plata High School.
I know that space travel can put the human body through a lot of stress. What kind of medical testing does an astronaut have to go to be physically and mentally fit for his duty?
Yeah, that's a great question. The medical test, gosh, I'm not sure if there's not a medical test that we haven't had. They put us through the ringer in terms of every kind of scan that you can imagine. We've probably had it, as well as medical checks, blood checks, the whole 9 yards. You get that actually if when you apply to become an astronaut, and if you're fortunate enough to go down for an interview, they actually go through that whole screening process medically just to make sure that you are physically fit. And in terms of fitness, we spend a lot of time on physical fitness, both on the ground before we launch and also up here, because that is one of the biggest impacts to the human body in the microgravity environment is, of course, as you see us floating around, you know, we don't use our legs as we're walking like you guys are down on the ground. And so our muscles have a tendency to become weaker, our bones get weaker, and so we need to counter that, and one of the ways we do that is with physical fitness. And so it starts with training on the ground to stay in as good a shape as we can, and then when we're up here, we probably work out about 1.5 hours to 2 hours every day.
Chris Lucas, La Plata High School.
What is the emergency protocol if an object such as an asteroid collides with the space station, and has an accident like this happened before?
Hey, Chris. Yeah, we train for all kinds of emergencies up here. So if something hit the space station and caused the air to begin leaking out of the space station, we have all kinds of emergency procedures. Of course, we'll get alarms. We have automatic systems that detect the pressure changes. Alarms will go off. We'll immediately evaluate the situation, and we have our Soyuz vehicles. There's 6 folks up right here right now. We have 2 Soyuz vehicles. There's 3 folks in each Soyuz vehicle. So if the leak is big enough, we will have to abandon the space station. If the leak is small enough, we will start sealing off the compartments one by one to try to determine which of the compartments is leaking. If we determine which compartment is leaking, we can seal it off and save the rest of the space station. If we can't seal it off in time, then we will just get into our Soyuz, we'll suit up, and we'll basically come home.
Kaylee Wade, Henry E. Lackey High School.
In your opinion, would it be hard to live your whole life there if you had a life supply of food and water?
You know, that's a great question, and I think you have to kind of try and put it in perspective. So for me, yes, it would be very hard because I've left a wife and kids at home and the rest of my family as well. And so I think it would be very difficult to live up here without having them with me. On the other hand, if this is all you knew or your family was up here with you, well, you know, that could be a lot of fun to spend your life up here.
Station, this is Houston ACR. Thank you. That concludes our event.
That again was Rick Mastracchio and Mike Hopkins talking on Tuesday with students from Charles County Public School outside of Washington, D.C.
And Houston Station on T2's number alignment guides installed.
Thanks, Hopper.
Seeing here some more video recorded earlier today. This with Mike Hopkins working on the NanoRack, or one of the many NanoRacks on board the space station. NanoRack platforms are multi-purpose research facilities on board the station that support a number of different science activities. This particular one is a BioRacks NanoRack that Hopkins was just installing this morning inside the Kibo laboratory.
And
We're coming up now on the end of Space Station Live for today and this week. Due to the Thanksgiving holiday, there will be no Space Station Live on Thursday or Friday, but we'll be back on at 10 a.m. Central Time on Monday with a revamped Space Station Live show that will run 30 minutes and include enhanced content and interviews on space station science. In the meantime, coming up next on NASA TV, you can get a look at activities going on at NASA centers across the country in the NASA TV video file. That'll be at 11 a.m. Central Time. And then tune in at 3:45 p.m. Central on Friday for coverage of the Progress 53 docking to the space station's Zvezda service module at 4:28. But before we do say goodbye today, we're going to leave you with a Thanksgiving message from the crew on board the space station. And we hope you have a happy Thanksgiving as well. This is Mission Control Houston.
Hi, I'm NASA astronaut Rick Mastracchio.
And I'm Mike Hopkins from Expedition 38 on the International Space Station. People often ask us what it is like to be on board ISS for the holidays. Though we miss our families, it's great to be in space. As astronauts, this is what we train for, and this is where we want to be. Opportunities to fly in space are rare, so we have to take advantage of them whenever they occur.
Like Mike said, we are happy to be up here orbiting above the Earth. If we can't be at home with our families during the holidays, then this is the next best place that any of us would like to be. The 6 of us up here are like a family, and we enjoy many meals together. Like most people in the U.S., Thanksgiving means spending time with my family and enjoying a big meal.
And for my family, we often travel during Thanksgiving because our relatives are spread out across the U.S. It gives us a chance to catch up with loved ones and relax.
And even though Thanksgiving is a work day here on the space station, we do plan on enjoying a big meal after our work is done. Here are a few items we plan to prepare. We have turkey and stuffed bread dressing.
Green bean casserole is one of my favorites, but this is dehydrated and we kind of have to mix it together as we eat it.
And then, of course, we got the dehydrated asparagus and even some baked beans here.
A few potatoes, as well as bread, but all they have to do is be heated up in the oven.
And of course, no good meal is done without some drinks and a fantastic dessert.
So we're all very grateful to be here, and we are thankful for the ground team that supports us during the holidays. We are grateful to the men and women in the military, especially to those who are also away from their families on deployment.
From the International Space Station, orbiting 260 miles above the Earth, we wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving.